All right, welcome in everyone. Today is January 5th, 2026. Back here with the first workshop of 2026 of the new year. Hopefully everyone had a great holiday season, all that stuff. It's kind of time now to get back to work and kind of get back in the flow of things. And like I mentioned a few weeks ago, I'm going to be kind of slowing these down a little bit for 2026. I'm only going to be doing 1 to 2 every month. So I'm not going to be doing these every single week anymore. And I'm also shifting to Mondays primarily instead of Tuesdays like it was. So things are kind of going to be a little bit different, but I think that's going to kind of help me hone in on specific topics that I really want to talk about and find more research or be able to do more research to be able to give better information. So I think it'll be good all the way around. But today, to kick it off, we're talking about pacing yourself as a creative. And you always hear the expression, life is a marathon, not a sprint. And I always think about that a lot. And I think it applies a lot to creativity as well, whether you're a musician or, a sculptor, painter, whatever you do creatively. You got to be able to figure out what your schedule is day to day, setting deadlines for projects, and overall just not rushing into things. And that can obviously be difficult when you have clients, that are paying you to do a certain job, especially within a set period of time. Things kind of change, it's a bit different than doing things on your own. I think when you're working on your own projects and you don't have somebody over your shoulder kind of telling you when and how to get things done, it becomes a lot easier to pace yourself. But, a lot of people, especially freelancers in the art world, they are being commissioned by other individuals and they're kind of on a time crunch. So how do you pace yourself through that as well? So I want to dive into this article that I found by Psychology Today, and it's called Deadlines and the Pacing of Creative Projects. This one is relatively the shorter of the two that I found. The other one is by the Marginalian, and it's called How to Hone Your Creative Routine and Master the Pace of Productivity. That one's a bit different. It touches on some different things. So definitely check that one out. It'll be in the description of this video. But let's dive into this one. This was written by Wilma Koetzel. I think I pronounced her name right. I don't know. But this didn't just come out. This came out almost 10 years ago in December of 2016. But I think there's so much helpful information in this. And, this is one of those topics where the discussion points are relatively not ever going to be outdated. They're always kind of going to be fresh because they just apply to life in general. But she gives a pretty good method in here that I never really thought of. So let's get into this. It says, what is the pace of your creative projects? When starting a new project, do you dive right from the start, intensively working on it? Is there a steep climb in your efforts followed by a lull during which you direct your efforts elsewhere? Then is it back uphill again as the next project milestone approaches? Or do you take a slow but steady approach, regularly working on the project until it's done and the deadline arrives? What might be some benefits of an intense start followed by a lull when working on a project? Styles of creative pacing. Recently, 3 researchers in the Netherlands teamed up to ask these questions about pacing, focusing on one type of creative project, architectural design. The researchers interviewed 25 architects with architectural work experience ranging from less than 5 years to more than 30 years. As a jumping off point for the interview, the architects were shown 4 different possible line drawings. Each drawing could graphically depict their pacing during the architectural project. So here are the 4 different ones that they saw. Steady and even, with a moderate but constant level of activity and effort from the beginning of the project until the deadline. A deadline style, with a little initial activity but a steep and intense increase in activity near the deadline. And this, it will also show you visually what this looks like. So they actually draw the lines out to show you what it looks like. The next one is an early style. the opposite of the deadline style, with a steep and intense activity at the outset of the project, but tapering off to little activity near the deadline. And then we have the one that I've never heard of before, but it's called the U-shaped style. And this is what this article is mostly touching on. The U-shaped style combines portions of both the early and the deadline styles, involving steep and intense activity at the outset of the project, followed by a creative lull with renewed intense activity near the deadline, like a letter U. So literally starting up here and then ending up here. The majority of the architects, 18 of the 25 interviewed, said they had been using the U-shaped pacing style. Of the remaining 7, 3 characterized themselves as having a deadline style and 1 as having a constant style. 3 of the architects said they did not want to choose because their style of pacing was not adequately shown by any of these drawings, but fluctuated more across time, involved a combination of styles, or changed depending on a particular project they were working on. So I think I can relate to those architects right there, where my style is never that consistent. I mean, it's consistent across the projects that I know I have full control over. I'd say, I'm definitely more of a U-shaped pacing style in that way, where I'm kind of just letting it go naturally and then kind of putting in equal amounts of effort along the way. I'm not just going like full steam out of the gate and then just forgetting about things. And I'm also not really ramping up super hard at the end. I think it's just more of that gradual process, letting it go. But it does depend on like what you're working on, because sometimes you need to, like I said about, if someone's commissioning you for work, you might be more of that style of starting really fast and then just trying to get it done. It says, why might most architects have found themselves using U-shaped style? Of the 18, 15 specifically spoke of the creative process in explaining their style. As one of the architects recounted, it works rather well to free some continuous time so you can thoroughly work your way into it and thus become aware of the complexities and pitfalls. Well, then you let the material sink in for a while. Thus, the dip in activity is used for letting the material sink in, really, which is pretty good because that allows you to also sit with your work a little bit and evaluate where you are in the process, and then just kind of give you the ideas of, do you need to shift it in any type of direction too? So I feel like that lull is almost necessary if you can afford it, of course. It says probed further, however, especially regarding their intermediate milestones during the course of an ongoing project. One of the architects drew a pattern of not one, but several successive U-shapes. This created an overlapping series of multiple recurring cycles of the U-shaped pattern, like a continual unfolding range of mountain peaks and valleys within the overall course of the project timeline. So obviously you can picture that. It's just kind of going like this. And again, that's kind of the gradual flow of anything, in life in general. But I think just kind of riding the waves of the process is really kind of what that represents to me. It says open goals or pending goals are aims or intentions that we have, but that are not yet met or that are incompletely realized. They are aims that we are still working toward, either in the foreground or in the background of our awareness. Such open goals tend to remain more highly neurally activated, and so help to guide our perception, what we notice, and where our attention is drawn. Our ongoing goals or projects can lead us. Still the beginning of the year, got to get back in the swing of things. So I apologize for all the lapses here. lead us to notice the possible connections and relevance of even quite distant information. Open goals allow us to notice selectively and purposefully, which again, we've talked about goal setting before, how important that is. I'd say there's no better time to get goal oriented than when you're working on a project, because you have to be able to understand, even if you don't have a set deadline, understand what is the end goal here. What am I really trying to get across to people? What am I trying to tell? What are the stories we're trying to create? And then, like we talked about with the lull, in that time, you can kind of evaluate, because at that point, you're halfway through the process. So that allows you to evaluate if you're heading in the right direction, if you need to change anything, all that good stuff. By dividing into a project and then letting it reside into the background of our awareness, while we turn our attention to work on other projects, we can start out by absorbing a bundle of necessary details and facts about the constraints of the project and the possible directions it might go, without committing to final choices. Having absorbed this information and then turning elsewhere, we give our minds time and space. Our minds can metaphorically walk in and around the project, including its many challenges and opportunities, perhaps coming to reconfigure the problem in a new light. That definitely is something I can relate to as far as having to work on multiple things at once. I almost love being able to. This definitely happens when I'm collaborating with people. If I'm collaborating with an artist, if we're working on a project, a lot of the times I don't have to put in the full amount 100%. I'm putting in about 50%, and the other artist is putting in that other 50% to equal the 100. So I don't necessarily always have to have that in the forefront of my mind. Sometimes I can do my part, kick it off to the artist, and then they're working on what they're working on. And while they're doing that, I'm focused on other things, my solo projects, podcasting, social media content, whatever it is, that's where my focus goes. So I'm not always focused on 24/7 all these collaborative projects. And that's a big reason why I'm able to collaborate with so many people at one time, is because I'm only doing part of that work and they're doing the rest of it. So I can allocate those tasks to those people and then they can take it from there. So that's what that makes me think of. And again, these are architects. These are people that are building structures, with a lot of money, with a lot of capital up front, construction costs, all that stuff. Think about the amount of things they have to plan for. As creatives, I think we got it relatively easy compared to those people, like musicians, of course. We have it relatively easy. We're not building huge structures, dealing with zoning, dealing with all kinds of stuff. So I think it differs per creative field, whatever it might be. Obviously, you kind of have to adapt. But if we're talking about music specifically, I read an article like this and it kind of makes things a lot easier. It almost puts things in perspective, because you're like, well, my process is super simple compared to what these people are doing. So I really feel confident that I could, implement that in my strategies every single day. And like I said, I've been doing a lot of this stuff, but even for me, it's motivating to be like, yeah, how can I even improve my productivity more? So that's something to think about for sure. Turning elsewhere also allows time for us to make happy chance discoveries. As we're busily, I don't know if that's a word, busily going about on our work for another project, we may just happen to encounter an image or phrase or idea that prompts us to see an alternative and better approach to our creative problem. And I think a side note of that as well is I've had that happen where if I'm working on another project and I might strike an idea that's like super exciting, I might want to apply that to one of the other projects I'm working on too, because it might work in the same type of realm. Not always, but sometimes it's almost like a crossover where the ideas that you have, maybe for the rollout, I think more about, the way you release music. That's been a big thing for me lately. So now I'm starting to think, how can I kind of cross-pollinate these ideas with the same type of methods and the same type of rollouts and see success in both areas, which I think is pretty cool. It says, or we may suddenly find how to overcome a specific nagging snag that we couldn't earlier, see how to avoid. Insights may arise, not just in a flash, but because we have given our minds the lull and the stimulating leeway from which insights are sparked. The article ends with 3 questions to think about. Number 1, if you think you thrive on the energy and pressure of a looming deadline, might you thrive more using the U-shaped pacing style? What's your optimal speed of cycling from peak to valley and back up to peak again? What are your open goals? Do you have the right number of open goals for you and your creative process? Or are they standing in each other's way? So again, something that I've never thought of before. I don't even think I've heard of that before, but the way that they articulate that in that article, I think is super helpful, and it applies to many different instances. So that's just something to definitely check out. And I think it just applies because it kind of gets you thinking in a much different way compared to what you might always think. Because I think a lot of people, they put pressure on themselves immediately to just get through it as quickly as possible, and they have trouble balancing the efficiency with the speed. But I think that method of having that little bit of time in between to evaluate what you're doing, like it says in the article, lets you look back at the beginning and you're looking toward the end as well, and you can kind of be able to figure out what you need to do. And that is the pacing itself. The lull is the pacing. That is the part that's super vital and super important. And to me, it's the most efficient way of getting things done. And again, this is something I've been doing and not even realizing that there was like a term for it, or, something that had already been studied where it makes sense why, that feels the best, at least to me. But again, it gives you those different methods because sometimes the U-shaped method isn't the best method. If you're, again, I'll say it again, if you're being paid to do something, you might have to make that U pretty small if you want to really get it done and meet the deadlines. But just something to think about, something to kind of apply in your day-to-day creative process, no matter what you're doing. And it's just a way of kind of making your brain think a little bit differently. And it definitely helped me a lot because I'm going to be thinking about that a lot with most of these projects I have coming up this year, especially. So that's pretty much it. That is the whole article right there by Psychology Today. You can read over it. You can see the visual representation of what I talked about. And definitely just, like I said, just think more about it as you're going through these different things that you're doing throughout the year and hopefully even past this year. And like I said, the other one is by The Marginalian. Both of these are in the description of the video. The next one that we are going to do is next week. Let me make sure that's correct. I want to make sure that I'm actually doing this on the right day. So January 12th, which is, a week from today. It's probably going to be later in the day, but releasing your projects early, that's what we're going to be talking about. So doing early releases, something that I've done a lot recently in the past 2 years almost. Releasing your project to a certain platform early ahead of time, allowing people to support it, and then eventually pushing it to all the other streaming platforms. So there's definitely a lot to dive into there, but I'm going to kind of keep it simple and keep it relative to my own experience and what I have done. So yeah, that's, I guess, next Monday is what it says. So I was trying to check to make sure that's true, but we'll say it's true because I think that would be the last one. I think that makes sense based on the timeline of the rest of the month. In a couple weeks, I'm going to be going to NAMM, which is a trade show out in Anaheim, California, specifically for music gear, music companies. A lot of different people show up to that event. Never been there before, but I'm very excited to go. So I think after that workshop, we're going to be talking more about my experience with NAMM because I'll be back by then. So this is going to be in February, but I'm probably going to do a couple different videos about NAMM and my experience and how it went and what I learned. So I'm very excited for that. So stay tuned for that as well. But we will see you 1 week from today. And hope hopefully you guys got something out of this video. Like I said, I'm trying to get back in the swing of things too. I'm about to be very busy here coming up for the next like month and a half. So it's gonna be interesting, but I'm excited for the year. And like I said, hopefully you guys had a great holiday season. Hopefully you take something from this video, and we'll see you next week on the 12th. Until then, stay safe, stay positive, and we'll see you guys then.